Hey folks, this is going to be a different kind of video. This has been a very hard video to make, and I know 28 years later came out a while ago, but I finally feel comfortable talking about it now. I've debated about sharing this with my viewers, but I believe in transparency, and what is going on behind the scenes heavily influenced how I took in 28 years later when I watched it. I appreciate those of you who have reached out to me, asking me about the state of the channel and my well-being, as my output of reviews and such on ML Miller Frights has been few and far between for the last few months, and I wanted to let you all know why that was. As I write this, I'm in the process of placing my mother into hospice, and most likely by the time you all listen to this, she will be gone. Those who have seen 28 years later, and I'm sorry for putting spoilers in this review, but I have to in order to talk about this, understand why this would be an issue upon watching the film. But in order for me to fully understand the movie and process both it and the way I'm feeling right now, I'm going to have to delve into some spoilers. So let's take a long look at 28 years later. It's going to be a different kind of review and a different take on it, so I don't blame you for not wanting to listen to it and going on to my much less personal and more standard reviews I've posted over the years. Here goes. 28 Years Later is available right now on demand. It's directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. 28 years ago, the rage virus spread across the UK like wildfire, causing anyone who came into contact with it to turn into a snarling, sprinting monster, spewing blood in all directions in order to spread the contagion. 28 years later opens up with a young boy named Jimmy, hidden away with other children in a small home. Soon it is obvious the infected are at the door and rampaging through the house. Jimmy escapes and flees to a church where his father, a priest, welcomes the infected into his church, believing it is God's plan. Jimmy witnesses his father's demise and escapes carrying a golden rosary his father gave him. Cut to 28 years later, and we're now in a small community on an island off the coast of northern UK. The only connection with the mainland is a land bridge that only appears at low tide. The dystopian community gives everyone a role to play in keeping them protected and thriving. Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, is a hunter who ventures into the mainland to scavenge for supplies and thin the herd of infected who may attempt to infiltrate the community. His wife Isla, played by Jodie Comer, suffers from an unknown ailment and is bedridden. Jamie decides that even though he is only 12, his son Spike, played by Alfie Williams, is ready to learn to hunt, scavenge, and kill his first infected. The first half of 28 years later deals with this learning and bonding process between father and son. But this is only the beginning of Spike's journey to manhood as he encounters the landscape that has evolved with the virus for the last 28 years. There's a lot going on with 28 years later, and I'll try to cover as much as I can. Looking back on this series, the films were always much more than just your typical zombie film. And yes, I know many like to distinguish the threat in the 28 Days Later franchise as the infected instead of zombies, but even in 28 years later, the term zombies are used, and these infected people are no longer there. So while I understand the distinction, I will put the franchise in the zombie subgenre of horror. If you don't, that's cool, but I do. The franchise has been more than just zombie survival. The first one seemed to be about hope after a time of crisis. There were absolutely horrifying things that occurred in 28 Days Later, but it ended on a very positive note. Jim and the crew had survived the horror and were hopeful when an airplane passes overhead. There seems to be some kind of end in sight to the horror. If this were a 9/11 allegory, something quite a few zombie films were at the time, it was director Danny Boyle at his most optimistic, a time where hope may be on the horizon. Then 28 months later came along, and it was apparent that our response to the tragedy was to basically nuke it from orbit. The heavy attention to military, while also showing how a family, even the most loving ones, can betray one another, showed a more pessimistic view. Our baser instincts took over, and instead of searching for a cure, which may be out there in some that have an immunity to the virus, The preference by the higher-ups to destroy rather than investigate prevailed. Of course, despite many desperate efforts by the military to contain the virus, it still persisted, spreading to France in the final moments. That was not such a chipper ending. It's pretty bleak if you ask me. That brings us to 28 years later, and as with the previous two films, the opening moments tells a lot about the themes explored in the rest of the film. 28 Days opened with a well-intentioned humanitarian effort to free chimps tested in labs, causing an outbreak, and ended with a positive note for humanity. 28 Months began with an act of betrayal for the family and ended in a failure of the military to fulfill their promise to protect. 28 Years begins with another family attacked and a boy witnessing its destruction with his own father, who he followed devoutly, showing some misguided beliefs. 28 Years opens with the boy Jimmy going against his father's word in order to survive and does not embrace the infected attack. This is basically the story we see play out through the rest of the movie, with Spike as he learns from his father, then has a moment where everything he believed was true, in actuality, is a lie, forcing Spike to take action on his own and seek answers when his faith in his father is lost. The first half of 28 Years Later is as intense as it can be. We are introduced to the fragile society, marked with signs and lessons everywhere, reminding the community that all the resources are everyone's and not to waste it. Water is portioned, food is free, everything is shared as long as the rules are followed. While many would look at this as some kind of socialist political statement, I don't know if that's what Boyle, writer Alex Garland, and this franchise are going for. This is still an anti-war message continued from 28 Weeks, but I also think they're saying that militaristic action is a necessity as well as being ugly, as represented by the inclusion of the amazing reading of the poem Boots by Rudyard Kipling, over a montage of society through the ages taking brutal military action in order to persevere. On a side note, while the Boots poem is amazingly edited in the trailer and through the 28 Years Later film, I have to give the Horror in the High Desert franchise credit for using the poem first in a horror movie. The terrifying poem shows up in the final moments of the first film and again evokes sheer terror. Back to the 28 Years Later, Boyle, Garland, and the film seems to show that in order for a society to function, both Hawk, militaristic, and Dove, compassionate, attitudes are necessary. Then again, I'm basing all of this on my experience with American politics. Being set in the UK, Boyle might have an entirely different message about his own government across the pond. Sadly, my knowledge of politics outside of the US is limited, so I may be way off with my analysis. Most likely, I am. Boyle has said in interviews that 28 Years Later is about family, and when I heard that, I automatically thought about the kumbaya sort of family message we often get in Hollywood movies. But sorry, Vin Diesel, that's not the kind of family 28 Years is all about. I think Boyle and Garland are telling a more realistic, pessimistic, and somewhat nihilistic message of how a child grows to an adult, and in order to do so, he has to leave his mother and father behind. Typically, one learns survival from the father and compassion from the mother. The amount of what one gets from each parent shapes the child into the adult the child becomes. At least that's the way it's been believed for many, many years before we got all smart and modernized. This is true in 28 Years Later as Spike learns the skills of survival from his father, but still has the naive dreams of a child encouraged by his mother. As his mother, Isla, lies sick in bed, Spike is taken a bit too early by his father to perform these more brutal trials to become a man. Most likely, if Isla were more present, she would have told Jamie to go fuck himself and wait until the boy is older. But she isn't, and Spike and Jamie go out into uncharted territory. I love the way the landscape has evolved in 28 Years Later, the way nature has taken over most places, covering houses and stopped trains with vines. The film definitely is more expansive than any other zombie film has depicted this post-apocalypse before. The threats have evolved too, with the infected basically becoming feral humans who have shed their clothes and sprint after anything that moves. Some of the more out-of-shape infected have become human slugs, slithering across the forest floor and eating anything that they come in contact with. They aren't exactly slow zombies, but they are an added threat as they move silently and are just as infectious and hungry as the fast ones. But the biggest and most terrifying threat are the alphas, giant infected man-mountains, all hair and muscle, towering over the rest of the herd and somehow leading them. These monsters have some form of higher intelligence, and though they are nothing like Romero's Bub from Day of the Dead, they are a bit more aware of their surroundings and are more intuitive to spread the virus and maintain their own survival. This first half wonderfully establishes that the threat has grown and added new life to the already treacherous landscape. Boyle takes his time adhering action to the lessons Jamie teaches Spike as they traverse the countryside and rotten buildings in the first half. While we've seen the threat of the infected before, never has it been so diverse and more dangerous. While Boyle and Garner is telling us a poignant tale about a father teaching his son to be a man, this is also an intense and action-oriented way of introducing this new world to the audience. The film makes a dramatic shift midway as Spike realizes his father's teachings are important, but also much of it is sullied with false bravado and outright lies. The first half is marvelously edited and filled with big-budget action sequences that really got my heart jumping. It never got to the point of where it was during the In the House in a Heartbeat sequence in 28 Days, but a few scenes, like the land bridge sprint sequence, came damn close. This is when 28 Years turns into a much more somber and thoughtful piece about life and death, and while I understand why mainstream audiences might not take to that, I felt this is where the film becomes so much more than your typical zombie survival flick. This is a bold move for filmmakers, as you always risk losing the audience when there's a tonal shift mid-movie. But like Full Metal Jacket, with its intense and its most memorable first half, the second half tonal change is what completes the message Kubrick is trying to tell, and I think the same goes for what Boyle and Garner are going for in 28 Years Later, which doesn't shift that tone once, but twice. It's a wonder anyone was still with the film by the end, and I think that's the reason many of those who dislike the film hang their hat on. The threat is consistent with the infected, but our understanding of that threat changes, and along with it, so does the character of Spike. In the latter half, Spike rejects his father Jamie, pulling away from him and sets out on his own. He's not quite a man, but Spike knows enough to understand he doesn't want to be like his father and chooses to take action on his own. And this, my online friends, is where it got personal for me. It's also going to be very spoilery from here on out, as if the first half wasn't. I lost my father at the same age as Spike does in the film, and yes, I know Spike's father doesn't necessarily die, but when he leaves the island community behind and looks to find someone to save his mother, Jamie might as well be dead to him. It is right here in the film where I couldn't help but identify deeply with Spike's magical thinking that at the end of his noble quest lies the treasure he desires, to get his mother back. But again, this is a mythical concept of family, like the Hollywood tales. There's no knight in shining armor rescuing the princess. This section focuses on the cold, hard fact that everyone racing around infected was once a human being, with loves, thoughts, dreams, wins, and losses. This message is communicated through a wonderfully soulful performance by Ralph Fiennes as the iodine-covered Dr. Kelson. Kelson has built a monument of skulls of all of the infected he has encountered, a task that has made him an outcast among the rest of the community, but one he has dedicated his life to. It's with Kelson that Spike learns that every life is precious, even the infected. Now, Boyle and Garland do a lot to pull on the heartstrings here. You've got the sick mother, the wide-eyed kid you followed for more than an hour. Then there's the amazing cinematography with the skulls piled into a tower, a golden sunset, and an overwhelming swell of music. While the threat is still present, the film takes a moment to slow down and acknowledge one single death in one especially gracious act of letting go. Sure, it's surrounded by the sprinting infected, rampaging alphas, and sluggish crawlers, but the moments Boyle gives Spike to come to acceptance of his mother's fate were some of the most touching you're going to see in a horror movie ever. It's a bold choice for Boyle to end the film in this way, especially after the pulse-pounding first hour, but in doing so, his extensive examination of death and how it affects different aspects of humanity with this series has been some of the most sophisticated ideas that are rarely broached in this genre. Seeing this scene hit me hard. more so than I could have imagined, and more so than I really like to express in such a public place as a theater or in an online review. But watching this young boy say goodbye to his mother struck a chord very close to home, too close to my current situation with my own mother. I want to go on and talk about the way the film was shot using multiple iPhones, but honestly, while the shots looked amazing, especially the way the film shifts its focus and slows down the moment, sometimes even freeze framing for a bit, that could be looked at as flashy bells and whistles anywhere else, but in a movie series that has never looked conventional, it's what I expected. I really know very little about camera lenses and screen formats and the like. I'll let other, more knowledgeable people discuss that. All I know is that everything looks unique, but that has been another constant factor through the 28 series. Boyle not only made a movie that hit me like a Mack truck, but turns out it looked pretty nifty too. I also want to acknowledge the wonderful performances. Aaron Taylor Johnson has become one of the better leading men in movies right now. Here he plays a flawed man, trying to do his best to raise a son that will be able to survive in this harsh world. It's a rather one-note metaphorical performance, as he does represent the aggro tough guy, something that this movie and Spike doesn't necessarily want to become, but he does the role very well and gives him much more nuance than the character deserves. Like Johnson does with fatherhood, Jodie Comer plays more of a symbolic aspect of motherhood, representing compassion and morality. Through half of the movie, she is delirious and bedridden, but aspects of both why Jamie was drawn to her and why Spike is fighting for her come through in the latter half. It is a selfless role where she too is not put into the best of lights at times, but Comer makes it her own. And again, while Ralph Fiennes is more of a representation of a lesson Spike needs to learn at this point in his life and in his journey, he always offers up a confident performance as the outcasted doctor. His sincere performance is mostly expository, but the words he speaks resonate and shine. Lastly, the performance of Alfie Williams as Spike was one that had to grow on me. At first, I was annoyed with this child actor. I thought he was the weakest part of the beginning, but then I realized his awkwardness and reluctance was purposeful. Like his character Spike, Williams grows as a character and ended up growing on me too. In the final dramatic moments, the little actor really does a fantastic job, showing real change since we met him in the beginning. Oh yeah, that ending. Another tonal shift from a meditation on mortality to a balls-out, almost slapstick farce with a blonde-haired, track-suited gang of thugs leaping to Spike's rescue against a herd of infected. I know only bits about the Jimmy Savile controversy. I know he was a despicable man who did heinous things. I also know that this probably resonated differently in the US, with most audiences oblivious to his crimes. But even without at first understanding it, I felt this shift in tone was mostly done to usher in the next chapter of the 28 Years Later franchise. Some might feel it undercuts the tone of the film, but I needed that cathartic laugh out loud moment after the second half ended, and I can't wait to see where this versatile series is set to go next. I don't want to get all preachy or anything, but in a genre where death is so common, sometimes we become jaded upon watching one person after another murdered by the slash of a serial killer or the claws of a monster. I know not every movie needs to make every character precious. I love the 80s where people fell like bowling pins, but 28 years later made me take a second and look at death a little closer. The fact that this horror genre, a genre that many look down upon, can make me feel such strong emotions is part of the reason why I watch horror to this day. 28 Years Later is the zombie movie I needed at the time I saw it. My mother allowed me to watch all of those horror movies as a kid. She helped form the lifetime horror file I am today. For that, I am forever in her debt. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. I also appreciate your support of this channel. I would be nothing without my loyal followers, and those of you who only listen to me occasionally. I'm going to try to up the output on this channel soon, and of course, this October's Best of the Year countdown is coming up quickly. So there's that to look forward to. I'll see you next time, folks. Rest in peace, Mom. I love you.